It was supposed to be a long solo hike, just me and the trail for 5 days straight. I had taken time off work, stocked up on food, packed my gear, and planned a route through a national forest I hadn't explored before. The area wasn't too remote, but it wasn't exactly crowded either. It was early fall, the first week of October, and the leaves were turning. The air felt crisp, especially in the mornings. It was the kind of weather I liked, cool enough to keep bugs away, warm enough to hike all day without freezing. I parked my car near a small dirt lot by a trailhead. There were a couple of other cars there, but not many. I strapped on my backpack, double-checked everything: map, compass, food, water, batteries, and locked up my car. My plan was to do a long loop that would take me deep into the forest, through a few ridgelines and valleys, with some camping spots marked on the map. I figured I'd see maybe 2 or 3 people each day, if that. I liked it that way. No noise, just trees, wind, and the crunch of my boots. The first day went smoothly. The trail was well marked, and I kept a steady pace. I passed a small creek around midday, refilled my water, and kept going. I saw a couple of hikers coming the other way, nodded, and kept walking. I pitched my tent near a clearing off a small side trail and built a small fire. It got chilly at night, but I had a good sleeping bag and layers, so I was fine. I slept lightly, like I always do outdoors, waking up at every distant rustle or snap of a twig. But that was normal. On the second day, I got deeper into the woods. The trail got narrower, more overgrown. It was still there, just not as clean as before. I followed it anyway, trusting the map. There were fewer signs, but the path was visible if you looked closely. Around mid-afternoon, I reached a ridge with a great view of the valley. I took a break, had a protein bar, and kept going. The trail curved downhill, and that's where I started noticing something that didn't sit right. About half an hour down the slope, I saw a tree with fresh bark stripped off, chest high. It wasn't clean like from a bear, more like someone had hacked at it with a knife or hatchet. The cuts were rough and angled. I paused and looked around. Nothing but trees. No animals. No voices. I kept going. Maybe someone was marking their way. I'd seen stranger things. An hour later, I saw another tree with similar marks, this time lower down, near the base. The bark had been cut in a wide circle around the trunk. Not completely through, but enough to damage it badly. It looked intentional. I stopped again, looked around, and stood still for a long minute. No wind, no birds, just silence. I told myself it was probably someone messing around. Maybe they were bored or trying to leave a trail. Not smart, but not unheard of. I kept hiking. By late afternoon, I reached a flat spot near a dry stream bed where I decided to set up camp. The area was quiet, but I felt a little uneasy. Still, it was too late to hike further. I made a small fire, boiled some water, and had a freeze-dried meal. As the sun dipped below the trees, the cold crept in fast. I crawled into my tent, zipped the bag tight, and tried to sleep. But something felt off that night. I woke up around 2 a.m., just from a sense that something wasn't right. I didn't hear anything at first, but then I picked up a soft, irregular rustling. It wasn't the wind. It had that unnatural rhythm to it, like footsteps on dry leaves. Not fast, but steady. I lay there, holding my breath, eyes wide open in the dark. The sound stopped, then nothing. I didn't hear it again. I told myself it might have been a deer or a raccoon sniffing around. Maybe it had heard me move and wandered off. But I stayed awake for a long time, barely blinking. In the morning, I stepped out and looked around the camp. I didn't see any prints or signs of animals, just leaves and dirt, undisturbed. I packed up quickly and got moving. The sky was overcast now, and the air felt heavier. That third day was harder. The trail was even fainter, like no one had walked it in years. I checked my map over and over to stay on the right path. Around noon, I came across an old campsite. There was a rusted fire ring, a half-buried can, and a few broken branches stacked in a pile like firewood. It looked like someone had stayed there years ago and left in a hurry. I moved on. About 2 hours later, I heard a sound that froze me in place. It was faint at first, a soft, distant crack, like a stick breaking underfoot. Then another, and then silence. I turned around slowly. The trail behind me was empty, but the trees were thick. Anything could have been watching me from 20 feet away and I'd never see it. I scanned the woods for movement, then kept walking faster. Every few minutes, I stopped and listened. Sometimes I heard nothing. Sometimes I thought I heard something, like a step, but it was never enough to be sure. Around 3 p.m., I reached a muddy stretch of trail. As I walked across it, I saw something strange in the soft earth. Footprints. Fresh ones. Not mine. They were heading the same direction I was, but they weren't recent enough to be just minutes old. Maybe a few hours. The weird thing was they were barefoot. Clear toes, no tread marks, and deep impressions like someone heavy had walked straight through. I followed them for a while, even though I didn't want to. I didn't have much choice. The trail and the prints were going the same way. After about a mile, the footprints veered off into the woods. I kept going on the trail. I didn't stop to rest that day. I wanted to get as far away from that muddy area as I could. I walked until my legs were shaking. Just before dusk, I found a flat area beside a steep rock face. There was only one way in or out, which made me feel a little better. I didn't make a fire. I didn't want to draw attention. I just ate a cold meal, climbed into the tent, and waited for morning. That night was worse. I didn't sleep. I kept hearing sounds. A crunch here, a slow step there, always one at a time. Not an animal moving fast or rummaging, just slow, measured movement. At one point, I swore I heard breathing just outside the tent, like someone standing a few feet away. It lasted maybe 20 seconds, then gone. I didn't move a muscle. By morning, I was already packed up before the sun was fully up. I didn't eat. I just started walking. I wanted out. I checked the map and tried to find the quickest route to a service road marked near the edge of the forest. It wasn't part of the original loop, but it would get me out faster. But the trail was worse now. It wasn't just faint. It was broken, overgrown, and hard to follow. I kept getting turned around. The compass helped, but the terrain didn't match the map perfectly. Around midday, I started realizing I might be going in circles. Some of the trees looked familiar. A crooked pine, a patch of white fungus on a log. I marked one with a scratch from my knife. 20 minutes later, I saw it again. I stopped, took off my pack, sat down on a rock. I felt lightheaded. My hands were shaking. I drank some water, tried to breathe slowly. I had food. I had supplies, but I was lost. That's when I heard it again. A single, clear footstep. Not close, but not far either. I stood up fast, scanned the woods. I couldn't see anything, but I knew I wasn't alone. I didn't rest again. I kept walking, cutting through brush, ignoring the trail. I wanted to find the road. I moved fast, stumbling sometimes, branches scratching my arms and neck. I saw a squirrel dart by once and nearly screamed. Every sound made my skin crawl. Around late afternoon, I finally saw something that gave me a bit of hope. A piece of plastic. A torn bag, half buried near a bush. Then an old aluminum can. And finally, tire tracks. Faint, but there. I followed them. It took another hour, but I found the road. It wasn't paved. Just a dirt maintenance road, but it was wide and clear. I followed it east. The sun was dipping behind the trees when I saw a small shack in the distance. Maybe a ranger station, I thought, but it wasn't. As I got closer, I saw that the building was old and falling apart. No windows. The door was half off the hinges. Inside, it was empty except for a few metal barrels and a torn sleeping bag on the floor. I looked around the shack, and that's when I saw something that made me stop cold. On the back wall, scratched into the wood, were rows of tally marks. Dozens, maybe hundreds, all carved by hand. I backed out and kept walking. I didn't stop again, even when it got dark. I used my headlamp, kept my pace steady, and finally, around midnight, I saw headlights in the distance. A ranger truck. I waved my arms until the driver stopped. He looked confused, probably at how I looked. Muddy, scratched up, shaking, but he opened the door, and I climbed in without a word. He drove me back to the ranger station. I didn't tell him I always liked being alone in the woods. There was something calming about the sound of my boots on dry dirt, the wind sliding through tree branches, the chirping of birds far above me. That quiet made me feel in control. No traffic, no phone service, no expectations. Just my pack, the trail, and the woods. It always seemed like the only place I could breathe fully. It was early October when I decided to do the solo hike. I took a few days off work and drove about 4 hours north to a trail system I hadn't visited before, somewhere near the edge of a national forest. I had read about it in a hiking blog. The trails weren't as busy as the big-name parks, which was exactly what I wanted. I had the time, the gear, the food, and I was in good shape. The plan was to hike a long loop over 3 days, camping twice in remote backcountry sites. Day 1 went smooth. The air was chilly but not cold. Leaves crunched underfoot and drifted down from above, covering parts of the path in orange and brown. I kept a steady pace for most of the day. The trail was well marked, a little muddy in places, but nothing difficult. Around 4 p.m., I stopped and set up my tent near a small creek. The sound of water helped me sleep. Day 2 is when things started to turn. I was about 2 hours into the day's hike, having just passed a wooden marker for a trail split. My map showed both options. One path curved out wide, adding several more miles to the loop, and the other cut more directly east toward the next campsite. The blog I'd read mentioned the shorter route, saying it was mostly overgrown but still passable. That seemed fine to me. I wanted to take my time at camp anyway, maybe gather some firewood and cook a hot meal. So I turned onto the shorter path. First, it wasn't bad. The trail was narrower, with brambles and saplings crowding the sides, but you could still tell it was a trail. The ground was firmer than I expected, even a bit rocky in spots. It sloped upward gently, and I kept going, figuring I'd reach a ridge before dropping down into a small valley on the other side. That's when the markings disappeared. No more blazes on trees, no more signs, no clear footprints or signs of other hikers. I paused and checked my GPS, but of course, there was no signal. I had an old-school compass and a printed topographic map in my pack, so I pulled those out and tried to orient myself. Based on the slope and the direction I had turned, I was still heading east, more or less. So I kept walking. The trees thickened. Branches started slapping at my arms and legs. I had to duck a few times under fallen logs and fight through undergrowth that grabbed at my ankles. I stopped several times to catch my breath and double-check my direction. I didn't want to panic, but something felt off. I should have hit the ridge by then, and I hadn't climbed enough. The ground was dipping now, subtly but definitely going downhill. It wasn't a trail anymore. I was just walking through woods, but I didn't want to backtrack. I hate retracing my steps. I figured if I kept going just a little further, I'd intersect the main trail loop again, or at least get close enough to spot it. That's when I found the first trap. I didn't see it until I was already in it. My foot hit something hard and metallic under a pile of wet leaves. There was a loud snap and then pain, sharp, immediate, and deep. I screamed, instinctively, even though no one was around to hear. I dropped to the ground and looked down at my leg. It was a bear trap, an old one, rusted and dull but still functional. My boot had protected me from the full damage, but the metal teeth had still dug through the sole and into my shin. Blood was already leaking out. I reached down and pried it open, screaming again as I did. It didn't break the bone, thankfully, but the gash was deep. I wrapped my leg in gauze from my first aid kit and sat there, stunned, for a long time. I wanted to yell at myself. I should have turned around when the trail disappeared. I should have stayed on the longer route. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was that I was bleeding, lost, and alone. I looked at my watch. It was almost noon. I'd been walking off-trail for over an hour. I still thought maybe I could push through, get back to the loop, and hike to the campsite before dark. I couldn't afford to sit still. If the bleeding got worse or the legs stiffened up, I'd be stuck. So I got up and kept moving. I limped slowly through the woods, leaning heavily on my hiking pole. Every few steps, I'd have to stop to catch my breath. The pain was constant now, dull and deep. My sock was soaked through with blood. An hour passed. Then two. The sun moved across the sky. I ate a protein bar while standing, trying not to collapse from fatigue. The woods here were thicker, darker. The trees were older. The air felt colder. I hadn't seen or heard anything in a while. No birds, no squirrels, no bugs. It was too quiet. That's when I started noticing things. First, I saw a dead bird nailed to a tree. A crow or maybe a raven, rotting and stiff. Its wings were spread and pinned to the bark with rusted nails. I stopped and stared at it for a long time, not sure if I was imagining it, but no, it was real. I stepped away quickly, heart pounding. Then I found the second trap. This one wasn't hidden. It was hanging from a tree limb, a snare made of twisted wire, dangling at chest height. Below it, a few broken branches and a dent in the earth suggested something had struggled there recently. I stepped around it carefully and kept walking. More signs followed. Bones scattered in the leaves. Not animal bones. I knew enough from documentaries and anatomy classes to recognize what I was seeing. Human ribs, a broken femur, a piece of jaw with teeth still in it. That was when I knew for sure I had made a huge mistake. I wasn't just lost. I was somewhere I shouldn't be. Someone had made those traps. Someone had nailed that bird to the tree, and someone had left those bones there. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't abandoned land. I had walked into something bad. I tried to stay calm. I tried to think rationally. If I kept going east, I'd eventually hit the river marked on the map. From there, I could follow it south toward the trail again. That became my new goal. Find the river. I picked up my pace, limping faster now, ignoring the pain. I could smell something foul in the air, rotting meat, something dead nearby. I tried not to look for the source. About 30 minutes later, I saw a clearing up ahead. My heart leapt. Clearings usually meant transition, open space, maybe signs of old paths, something. But when I reached it, I stopped cold. There was a shack in the clearing. Small, rotted wood, half-collapsed roof. No windows, a single crooked door. Piles of junk scattered outside. Rusted cans, broken chairs, dirty clothes. A tarp was nailed to one side like someone had tried to patch a hole in the wall. I didn't want to go closer, but I also didn't want to stay where I was. The river might have been nearby, but if there was any chance of a map, a radio, or tools inside that shack, I had to check. I approached slowly, listening. Nothing. No sounds. No wind. I pushed open the door with my hiking pole. Inside, it was worse than I expected. Piles of bones. Dozens of traps. Ropes, chains, knives, saws. A table with what looked like dried blood caked into the surface. In one corner, a small mattress soaked in dark stains. Clothes hung from hooks on the wall, hiking jackets, boots, backpacks. All worn, dirty, torn. I saw a backpack I recognized. It was the same brand and color as the one in the blog post I had read. The hiker had said he was doing this same loop. He'd never posted again. That realization hit me like a punch to the chest. I turned and left the shack as fast as I could, limping into the trees. I didn't care about the river anymore. I just wanted out. That's when I heard footsteps. Behind me, steady, slow. I didn't look back. I ran. Every step was agony, but I forced myself forward. I didn't think. I just moved. Branches whipped my face. My injured leg buckled, but I kept going. Eventually, I reached the river. It wasn't wide, maybe 15 feet across, but the current was strong. I didn't stop. I splashed in and crossed, slipping on rocks, nearly falling. When I got to the other side, I climbed up the opposite bank and kept moving. The footsteps had stopped. I kept following the river south. My leg was useless now, dragging behind me. Blood soaked my pants. My hands were raw. My throat was dry. I don't know how long I walked. Hours, maybe. The sun started going down. I started to feel dizzy. I kept going. Then I heard a sound, an engine. Faint, distant. I moved toward it, using the last of my strength. I broke through the trees and found a dirt road. A pickup truck was parked there. A man in an orange vest was unloading something from the back. He looked up, saw me, and ran over. That was the last thing I remembered before I passed out. I had always liked hiking alone. There was something about it that made everything feel more real. No talking, no distractions, just the sound of my footsteps and the feel of the trail under my boots. I liked the way it cleared my head. I didn't do it for social media or for some challenge. I did it because I liked the silence. The kind of silence you can only get way out there, where the air feels untouched, where nobody is around to remind you of cities and roads and phones. Just trees, sky, dirt, and time. That summer I decided I was going to hike through a remote section of forest in central Idaho, a part of the Salmon Challis National Forest that wasn't as popular as the rest. Most people didn't go deep into this part because there weren't many mapped trails, and the land was rough. Lots of steep ridges, narrow paths, and thick undergrowth. I liked the idea of that. I had camped and hiked enough over the years to feel confident. I wasn't careless or naive. I planned everything out, packed properly, left a basic route plan with my brother in case something happened, and made sure I had a good GPS device and backup battery pack. My phone had maps downloaded for offline use, even though I didn't expect signal out there. The plan was to do 5 days out and back. I parked my truck off a Forest Service road where it met an old logging trail, the kind that's overgrown but still visible. I was going to follow a rough loop that would take me up through a ridge line, then drop down into a valley that ran along a creek. I'd camp near the water the first night, then keep moving through the valley to where it narrowed into a canyon. I'd camp again near a lake that was marked on the topo map. From there, I'd loop up and around back through a series of switchbacks and finally backtrack to my truck. That was the general plan. I wasn't trying to blaze new ground or do anything heroic, just enjoy the quiet. The first day was tough but good. The trailhead was warm, mid-70s, the sun was out, but the trees gave good shade. I hiked through mostly lodgepole pines with some firs and a lot of brush. Saw deer tracks, some old elk droppings, and once a black bear print, but it wasn't fresh. There were birds calling overhead. The ground smelled like pine needles and dry earth, and every so often a breeze would come down from the ridge and cool the sweat on my neck. My pack was heavy at first, but after a few hours I stopped noticing it. I was making decent time. I set up camp beside the creek just before sunset. I found a small clearing, just big enough for my tent, maybe 20 feet off the water. I boiled some water for my dehydrated meal, ate in the fading light, and spent the rest of the evening writing in my small notebook. I made some notes about the terrain, what I saw, and how far I thought I had gone. Nothing felt strange or off, just a normal solo hike. That night was colder than I expected. I slept in a synthetic mummy bag that I'd used on colder trips before, but I still woke up a few times with cold hands. There were a lot of noises, normal forest stuff like owls, wind in the trees, branches shifting, but also one sound I couldn't quite place. It was distant, a low, short metallic clank. Just once. I chalked it up to a tree branch falling on a rock or something metal in my bag settling. I fell back asleep eventually. The next morning, I felt a little off. Nothing specific, just slow. I figured it was from not sleeping well. I made coffee, stretched, packed everything, and followed the creek as it moved east into a narrower valley. The landscape changed slowly. The trees got taller and closer together, and the ground turned rockier. I had to climb over fallen logs a lot. The terrain was starting to feel more wild, less maintained. It took more effort to push through the brush, and the sun barely made it through the canopy. Around midday, I found a break in the trees that looked like a very old path, almost hidden under the growth. I stood there for a few minutes, just looking at it. The map didn't show anything there, but it looked like something had been carved out a long time ago. Maybe a game trail or a logging road from decades back. It was heading in the general direction I needed to go. I checked my GPS. The satellite map showed the same thing, nothing. But the path was there. Not exactly wide, but definitely man-made. Curved off to the northeast, gently rising. That's when I made a choice that started everything. I decided to take the path. It felt like a shortcut, or at least a more direct way to the lake. I wasn't thinking of danger. I was thinking of time, and honestly, I liked the idea of walking a path nobody used anymore. felt private. The trail was harder to follow the farther I went. After about an hour, it narrowed into something barely more than a line of flattened brush. I kept going, figuring I'd eventually hit the lake from a different side. But then the trees closed in tighter, and the air felt heavier. Not hotter, just denser. I didn't hear any birds anymore. That was the first time something felt off. I looked around and realized I hadn't heard anything for a while. No rustling, no insects, just my boots on the ground and the soft creak of my pack straps. I kept walking, slower now. The trees were strange, taller, but the branches didn't spread out much. They were bare near the base and thick near the tops, almost like they had been forced to grow upward quickly. I don't know why I noticed that, but I did. There was also more moss. Covered everything, rocks, fallen logs, even some trees. It made the whole place feel wet, even though I hadn't seen water in hours. I stopped to check my GPS again. No signal. That was expected. But the strange thing was, the backup compass app couldn't find true north. Kept spinning, recalibrating. I checked my regular compass, the analog one clipped to my chest strap, and it was pointing somewhere weird, east-southeast, not north. I tapped it. The needle moved slightly, then stopped again. I stood still for a while. I couldn't hear anything. I was starting to feel watched. Not by an animal, not in some horror movie way, just like something was near. I told myself it was just because I hadn't seen anything alive for hours. That's normal in deep woods. Still, I turned around and decided to head back to the creek and stick to the original plan. I didn't like how quiet it had gotten. I figured I had only gone a few miles off course. That's when I realized I didn't know where I had come from. I turned around and couldn't find the path. I looked for signs of where I had walked, broken twigs, footprints, but the ground was covered in soft moss and pine needles. I couldn't see anything that told me which way I had come from. Everything looked the same in every direction. Thick trees, mossy ground, no sun above the trees to guide me. It was like the trail had vanished behind me. I didn't panic. Not yet. I walked back the way I thought I had come. After 30 minutes, I was deeper in. The trees grew closer. It felt like they were shifting slightly, just enough to disorient me. I kept trying to retrace steps, but I was only getting more turned around. Eventually, I found a clearing. Not a natural one. It was circular, flat, maybe 30 feet across. In the center was a wooden structure, just a small shed, or a shack. I couldn't tell how old it was, but it looked like it had been there a long time. The wood was gray and weathered, but the roof looked intact. There were no windows, just a door that was shut. No path leading to it, no signs anyone had been near it for years. I didn't want to go near it. I don't know why, but the second I saw it, something in me pulled back. My legs felt stiff. My chest tightened. I looked around and saw no footprints, no animal tracks, nothing. Just that building sitting in the middle of the clearing like it had grown there. But I was lost, and I figured maybe someone had used it as a hunting cabin or something. Maybe there were supplies inside. Maybe a map. I walked toward it slowly. Each step felt wrong, like I was walking into something I wasn't supposed to see. When I reached the door, I saw something strange. The doorknob was clean, not rusted like the hinges. It looked new, polished, as if someone had installed it recently. I reached out and touched it. It was cold, too cold. I opened the door. The smell hit first. Not death, not rot, just old, stale, like a space that had been sealed for decades. Dust floated in the air. The inside was dark, but I could see enough to make out a few things. A small wooden table, a metal chair, a shelf with old cans. Some were so rusted I couldn't read the labels. There was a lantern on the table, and something else, paper, a map. I stepped inside. The wood floor creaked under my boots. I picked up the map. It was hand-drawn, pencil lines, faded and smudged, but I could make out part of the ridge I had come from. There were landmarks, rock face, dead tree, cabin. My heart dropped a little when I saw that word. It was labeled right where I was standing. Someone had marked this shack on the map. Then I saw something else on the corner of the paper. A date, 1994. I folded the map and turned to leave, but something caught my eye. Scratched into the wall near the doorframe were markings, tallies, hundreds of them, groups of 5 running all the way from the top of the frame to the floor. I left quickly. It was mid-September when I decided to take a long solo hiking trip into the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. I had been working non-stop for the last 8 months, and I could feel the burnout creeping in. My head was always heavy, and I felt like I was trapped in the same cycle every day. Wake up, go to work, come back tired, sleep, repeat. I needed to get away from people, noise, my phone, everything. So I chose a stretch of land deep in the Rockies that was mostly untouched. No campsites, no official trails, and no cell coverage. I had spent 2 weeks researching the area. I marked my entry point, noted several freshwater streams, studied the terrain on topographical maps, and packed extra batteries for my GPS device. I wasn't reckless. I planned every part of this. I took 6 days off work and wanted to stay out there for 5 of them. I packed 5 days worth of dehydrated food, a water filter, a small stove, a sleeping bag, tarp, thermal blankets, bear spray, a knife, and all the essentials. The plan was simple. Hike northward from the trailhead into the deeper woods, stick to the ridgelines, then loop around a set of 3 glacial lakes I found on the satellite view. No trails, just raw wilderness. I didn't want to hear another voice for 5 days. Day 1 started smooth. I parked at a small gravel lot that marked the start of an old, overgrown fire road. The weather was cool, the air sharp and dry. I stepped out, pulled my pack onto my back, checked the straps, locked the car, and walked into the trees. Within minutes, I was surrounded by silence. Just the faint crunch of pine needles under my boots and the distant wind slipping between the trunks. The road gave way to thick forest within the first hour. I followed a game trail that twisted through the trees, going steadily uphill. Around midday, I stopped to boil water and eat some granola and jerky. I marked my location and progress on a paper map and double-checked my route. So far, everything was going just the way I wanted: quiet, clean, disconnected. I kept hiking until about 5:30 p.m. when the light started dipping lower between the trees. I found a flat spot beside a rocky ledge, cleared away some fallen limbs, and set up my shelter using a tarp and some cord tied between 2 trees. I rolled out my sleeping pad and bag, filtered some water from a nearby stream, cooked a quick meal, and laid back to rest. It was cold that night, but I slept all right. A few small animals rustled around in the dark, but nothing unusual. On day 2, I kept moving deeper. I was now well beyond any paths most people would use. The trees got thicker, the terrain rockier. I climbed up a narrow gully that led to a small clearing that had a great view of a distant peak. I stopped to take a photo and noticed how far away everything looked. Felt good. Exactly what I came for. Around noon, I reached a small ravine where I had planned to refill my water. I bent down near the edge, and something caught my eye about 50 yards upstream. A ripped cloth was hanging from a branch over the stream. I thought it was strange, but probably from a hunter or another hiker who'd passed through long ago. Still, something about it felt a little off. I kept staring at it for a while, then shook it off and moved on. I kept walking for the next several hours, but around 3 p.m., I noticed something strange. The forest got unnaturally quiet. No birds, no wind, no rustling, just dead silence. The kind that makes your ears ring. I paused to drink water and looked around. Nothing was obviously wrong, but I started feeling this strange pressure in my chest. Not like a medical issue, just a heaviness, like the trees were leaning in. I thought maybe I was just tired. Then, while I was scanning the tree line, I noticed a pile of rocks off to the right. Not a natural pile, this one was clearly built by someone. It was a stack of flat stones, 5 of them, all balanced perfectly. That wasn't what bothered me, though. What got me was that the top stone had what looked like dried mud or some kind of stain on it. Brown, but darker in the middle. I walked over, slowly, and bent down to get a better look. It smelled faintly metallic. It might have been old blood, or maybe rust, I wasn't sure. But it didn't look like an animal had done it. It looked intentional. I backed away and kept moving, now a bit more alert. I told myself people build weird things in the woods all the time. Hunters, hikers, even artists. It didn't mean anything. Still, the quiet didn't go away. The wind didn't come back. Even the squirrels were gone. By the time the sun dipped low, I found a decent place to set up camp again, under a rock outcropping. I cleared the area, ate fast, and didn't build a fire. I just sat there in the fading light, staring at the tree line, listening for anything. Nothing came. I lay down and tried to sleep, but I kept waking up every hour. Around 2 a.m., I heard something. It was faint, like a soft, distant shuffle. Maybe 100 yards away. I froze, staring into the black trees. I gripped the bear spray and waited. The sound came again, closer this time, just 1 or 2 crunches in the leaves. Not fast, not loud, just slow and steady. Then silence. I laid there for what felt like an hour, not blinking, until the first bit of dawn light hit the sky. On day 3, I packed quickly. I told myself I would go up to the ridge, get a better view, and maybe cut the loop shorter. I didn't want to turn back yet, but something in my gut was starting to whisper. I climbed for hours through thick brush and steep rock. By noon, I reached the top of the ridge and saw the first lake, small, cold, surrounded by stones. No sign of anyone, which should have been comforting, but wasn't. I moved around the north side of the lake and found what looked like another old fire ring. But this one was strange too. There were broken branches arranged around it like a star. Not natural, not random. Something was wrong in these woods. That evening, I camped near the second lake. I made sure nothing was around, no weird rocks, no broken branches. I stayed low, kept everything tight, and slept with the knife under my hand. At some point in the night, I woke up to footsteps. Not animals, not multiple, just one. It walked slowly, maybe 15 feet from my shelter. Crunch, pause, then it stopped. I held my breath. 5 seconds passed, then 10, then 20. I finally whispered in my mind, "Go away, go away, go away." Eventually, the steps moved again, away this time, down toward the trees. I didn't sleep after that. By day 4, I had made up my mind. I was going to skip the third lake and start heading back, cutting through the valley and returning to the car a day early. I didn't care about finishing the loop anymore. The hike was brutal. Steep inclines, narrow ledges, thick woods. I was moving fast, trying not to stop too long. I kept thinking I heard something behind me, but every time I turned, there was nothing, just woods. Around 3 p.m., I found something that made my stomach twist. It was a tree, stripped clean of bark about 6 feet up, in perfect rings like it had been shaved by a blade. That wasn't animal work. It was too clean, too smooth, and nailed into the side of the trunk was a plastic grocery bag. Inside it was a torn piece of fabric, a button, and what looked like old dried skin. I turned around and started walking faster. I didn't even mark the spot. I just wanted distance. The light was fading fast, but I didn't want to stop. I hiked until it was almost pitch black and only stopped when I nearly tripped over a root from exhaustion. I threw down my bag, didn't eat, didn't even set up a proper shelter. I just wrapped myself in the tarp and laid there in the dirt, eyes wide. That night I heard nothing, but the silence was worse than footsteps. On the final day, I was maybe 8 miles from the car, and I moved nonstop. The forest still felt off. I had hiked alone many times before, Utah, Wyoming, Oregon, but I had never felt like I was being watched. Now, I couldn't shake that feeling. When I finally reached the fire road near the trailhead, it was past noon. My legs were sore, my back ached, and I was thirsty as hell. But when I saw the gravel lot through the trees, I almost cried. My car was still there, nothing broken. But as I got closer, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were prints in the dirt beside the driver's side door. Not boot prints, bare feet, long toes, human, but no shoe treads, and they led back into the woods. I didn't wait. I jumped in, locked the doors, turned the key, and peeled out of there like a bat out of hell. I didn't stop until I hit the first gas station 40 miles away. I sat in the car for a long time, shaking, trying to understand what had happened. To this day, I don't know who or what was out there. I never saw a face. never heard a voice. But I know I wasn't alone. Someone was out there, watching, following, and for some reason, they didn't want me to finish that loop. I've been on dozens of hikes since then, but I've never gone that deep alone again, and I never will. I never really thought much about how one small mistake could completely unravel everything. I've hiked alone plenty of times. I enjoy the solitude, the rhythm of my boots hitting the dirt, the way my breath settles into a steady pace as I climb higher into the woods. Clears my head. But that one weekend trip, just me, a packed bag, and the idea of peace, ended in a way I never could have imagined. I still play it over in my mind, step by step, trying to figure out where exactly I went wrong. It was mid-September when I drove up north, deep into the Kootenai National Forest in Montana. I chose a remote area I'd never explored before. I liked that it wasn't crowded. Most hikers stuck to the southern parts, closer to towns and campsites. I wanted quiet, isolation. I parked my truck at a dead-end trailhead and locked up. My plan was a 3-day solo loop, start at Hidden Creek Trail, cut across Stony Ridge via an unmaintained trail, then loop back through Bear Gulch. According to my topographic map, the trails were still navigable. I had my compass, my Garmin GPS, a printed map sealed in plastic, plenty of food and water, a sturdy tent, a backup battery, and my usual emergency gear. I even had bear spray. I thought I was over-prepared. I thought I was smart. The first day went smooth. A bit of a drizzle in the morning made the trail slick in places, but I made decent time. The forest felt heavy but beautiful. Tall larches swaying above me, soft moss underfoot. Every once in a while, I'd hear the wind roll through the trees like a wave. Squirrels darted across the trail. I saw deer in the distance a few times, but they never stuck around. I crossed a shallow stream in the afternoon and made camp near a natural clearing a little off-trail. No signs of human presence at all, no fire rings, no litter. I liked that. I pitched my tent under a big pine, hung my food, and cooked a simple meal on my small stove. That night, the wind picked up hard. I could hear it howling outside like something alive. It shook the tent a few times. I didn't sleep much. My mind kept wandering to the odd creaks and snaps I heard in the distance, but I kept telling myself it was just trees, maybe elk. Normal forest sounds. I camped in windier places. By morning, things seemed calm again. I took my time breaking camp, rechecking my gear, refolding the map. I had a longer hike that day, about 16 miles if I followed the unmaintained trail across the ridge. It looked like a straight line on the map, a bit steep but doable. I'd done steeper. The trail started off okay, but after the first few miles, it began fading fast. What was once a visible path turned into broken patches of dirt, overgrown brush, and fallen trees. I had to use the compass to keep my bearings. The GPS signal was fading in and out. Thick trees above made it useless at times. That was the first real sign of trouble. But I didn't panic. I've had trail markers vanish before. I know how to use a compass and read terrain. I kept moving. Then it started raining again. Not a soft drizzle like before, but a cold, steady rain that soaked through my clothes even with the rain jacket. The ground turned into mush. I slipped several times. My boots sank into mud up past the ankle. The trail, if you could still call it that, was almost completely gone. I had to push through thickets of wet brush, hands scraped and bleeding from grabbing at branches to stay upright. I still didn't turn back. I didn't even consider it. That's the part that keeps haunting me. I could have turned around. Around late afternoon, I reached a rise that was supposed to lead up to the ridge. My legs were burning from the climb. The trail was nothing more than deer tracks by then. I followed them, thinking they were headed the same way. But the further I climbed, the more everything started to look wrong. The trees were different, shorter, denser. I didn't recognize the slope. I paused and looked at the map again. The contours didn't match what I was standing on. I pulled out the compass. North didn't look right. I was already off course. I checked the GPS again. No signal. The rain got harder. The light was fading. That's when I made the worst decision of the entire trip. I told myself I could cut across to rejoin the trail. I tried to follow what looked like a dry gully down the hill, thinking it would level out. Didn't. The ground gave way under me, slick and muddy. I slipped and tumbled down a steep slope, slamming into a tree and rolling over jagged rocks. My backpack cushioned some of the fall, but my left leg twisted hard under me. When I stopped moving, everything went quiet except the rain. Couldn't stand. The pain in my leg was sharp and deep. Not a break, but bad. A sprain at the very least. My hands were cut up, mud packed into my palms and under my nails. My ankle swelled quick. I tried to stand and fell again. My pack was a few feet uphill from where I landed, half covered in leaves and wet pine needles. I crawled to it, soaked to the bone, shivering hard. I pulled out my emergency blanket and wrapped it around my shoulders. I dug out the satellite emergency beacon, flipped open the antenna, and pressed the button. Nothing. No blinking light. No signal. I pulled out the backup battery and tried again. Still nothing. I sat there in the mud, rain pouring down, freezing, realizing I might have just screwed myself beyond recovery. That night was a blur of pain and cold. I didn't pitch the tent. Couldn't. The slope was too steep. I wedged myself under a cluster of low branches and wrapped up as best I could, shivering so hard my teeth clacked. I kept drifting in and out of sleep, waking up every few minutes to reposition or to check if something was near. I kept hearing noises, branches snapping, something moving in the dark, something heavier than deer, but I couldn't do anything about it. I had bear spray in my hand the whole time. My ankle throbbed nonstop. The next morning, the rain stopped, but a thick fog covered everything. I couldn't see more than 20 feet ahead. The cold was bone deep. My fingers were stiff. I tried again to stand, but the ankle wasn't going to hold weight. I had to crawl. I knew I couldn't stay there. My food was soaked, most of it ruined. I had a few sealed bars left, but not enough for more than a day. My water filter was in the pack, thank God, but I still needed a water source. I made a decision. Follow the slope down. Always down. I figured it might lead to a stream or open space. If I could get lower, maybe I'd get GPS again. I started dragging myself, pushing the pack ahead of me. The terrain was rough, fallen logs, thorns, roots that snagged my jacket. I tore a gash in my side sliding over a log. Blood soaked into my shirt. Couldn't stop. I didn't stop. Hours passed. The fog never lifted. I didn't hear any planes or helicopters, just wind and the occasional bird. Sometimes I thought I heard voices in the distance, but they were just wind through the trees. That messed with my head. I kept checking the GPS. Nothing. I slept again that night under a rock outcrop, wrapped in the emergency blanket. My ankle was twice its size. I rationed food 1 bar for the day. I was so thirsty, but there was no water, no streams, no puddles, nothing. Just wet plants I tried sucking moisture from. The third day, I hallucinated. I'm sure of it. I saw lights between the trees at one point, blue, flickering like campfires, but when I dragged myself closer, they were gone. My head felt light. My vision blurred sometimes. I was getting weaker. Then I found the boot. It was half buried in leaves and mud, the sole sticking out at an angle that caught my eye. I pulled it free. It wasn't mine. Old, leather, laces gone. Worn down like it had been out here for years. I stared at it for a long time. There were scratch marks along the side. Deep ones. Not from rocks. From claws or blades or something sharp. I dropped it and kept moving. That night I didn't sleep. Something was out there. I know I said no fairy tale stuff, and I stand by that. There was no monster or ghost. But I heard movement. Heavy steps circling the outcrop. Not running, just walking, like someone or something was pacing. I held the bear spray in both hands, ready. It never came closer. I just listened to it move around me for what felt like hours. By morning, I was close to giving up. Then I heard water. It was faint, but it was there, a steady trickle. I dragged myself toward it, using my arms, my good leg, grabbing at roots and branches. I found a tiny stream tucked into a ditch. It was barely a few inches wide, but it was moving. I filtered what I could, drank slowly. It helped. It gave me just enough energy to keep crawling. The trees started to thin around midday, and then finally I saw a logging road. It was old, muddy, filled with tire ruts and overgrowth, but it was man-made. I cried when I saw it. I didn't think I could make another step, but I did. I had been planning this hiking trip for months. I'd taken time off from work, cleared up a whole week, and mapped out everything. My plan was to spend 5 days hiking through a quiet mountain range in Washington state. Nothing too crazy or risky. The area wasn't popular like the national parks, but it had beautiful ridges, pine forests, rocky streams, and deep valleys. I chose it because I wanted to get away from noise, people, and phones. I didn't want anything to do with traffic, schedules, or crowds. I just wanted to walk, breathe in the forest air, and feel like I wasn't being pulled in 5 directions at once. I packed everything carefully. A lightweight tent, sleeping bag, extra food, a water filter, first aid kit, bear spray, GPS unit, headlamp, backup flashlight, extra batteries, emergency whistle, waterproof jacket, good boots, a topographical map, and even printed trail notes I'd found online from people who had done this route before. I wasn't new to hiking. I'd been doing it for over 10 years. I'd done solo trips before, but this one felt different. I felt like I was trying to disappear, in a good way. I wanted to be alone. No calls, no texts, just trees, hills, wind, maybe some deer or a moose. The first day went fine. The sun was out, the trail was dry, and I made it to my first camp spot by 5 p.m. I set up the tent near a stream, made dinner, and sat by the water for a while. I didn't see another person all day. That was exactly what I was hoping for. The second day started the same. I woke up early, made oatmeal, packed up, and got back on the trail. The sky was a little cloudier, but nothing serious. I followed the marked route, crossed a few small creeks, and even saw some elk in the distance. Around noon, I reached a fork in the trail. According to the map, the right path was part of an old logging road, not well maintained, but it connected back to the main trail after about 4 miles. The left trail was the one I had planned to take, but something made me stop. I stood there for a while, looking at both paths. The old logging road was wider, easier to walk, and had a gentle slope down through the forest. The main trail looked rocky and narrow, cutting up the side of a ridge. I was ahead of schedule, and I thought it might be nice to take a different route just for a change of pace. Plus, according to the notes I had, the old road would meet up with the trail again. I turned right. That was the mistake. First, it was fine. The trail was easy, wide, and quiet. I walked for maybe 2 hours, enjoying the soft dirt under my boots. I passed some old tire ruts and rusted metal debris that looked like pieces of logging equipment. The forest was thick on both sides, but I could see the trail ahead clearly. Then it started narrowing. First a little, then a lot. The wide road became more like a path. After another mile, it was just a thin line through tall grass and overgrown shrubs. I checked my GPS and map again. The trail was still there, barely, but I was going in the right direction, or so I thought. About half an hour later, I came to a small creek that wasn't marked on the map. It wasn't deep, but it had no bridge or clear place to cross. The path on the other side looked even rougher, almost like an animal trail. I paused. Something felt off. I looked at the GPS again, but the signal was weak. The screen froze, then flashed, recalculating over and over. I tried to check my map, but the landmarks didn't match up. I started feeling uneasy. I should have turned around, but I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe pride, maybe stubbornness. I crossed the creek, got my boots a little wet, and kept walking. The path disappeared within 10 minutes. There was nothing, just forest. I looked around, walked in a small circle, then another. Nothing. No trail. No signs. Just trees, moss, and thick underbrush. I tried the GPS again. Still frozen. I took out my compass, tried to line it up with the map, and picked a direction that seemed to head back toward the main trail. I told myself if I just walked east for an hour, I'd hit the path again. I started walking, That was when everything began to go wrong. The forest in that area wasn't like the parts I'd hiked through before. It was thick. Branches scratched at my arms. Vines and brambles caught my legs. I tripped over roots, slipped on wet moss, and had to duck under fallen logs. Every direction looked the same. I walked for over an hour, then two. Then I realized I was completely turned around. I had no idea which direction I was going anymore. The light was fading. The GPS still wouldn't connect. I climbed up a small hill hoping to get a better signal, but even from the top, I couldn't see anything familiar. No ridges, no trails, not even the creek I'd crossed. That night, I made camp in a small clearing. I didn't want to, but I had no choice. I was exhausted and sore, and it was getting dark fast. I set up the tent, ate a granola bar, and sat inside with the headlamp on, listening to the sounds outside. The forest was loud in a quiet way. Branches creaking, wind rustling through leaves, distant thumps like something heavy stepping through underbrush. I kept thinking I saw shadows moving just outside the tent, but when I looked, there was nothing. I barely slept. The next day, I tried to retrace my steps. It didn't work. Everything looked different. I tried to remember which direction the creek was, but I couldn't find it again. The forest was too dense. Every turn led to another mess of trees and brush. I started feeling panic rise in my chest. My heart would beat fast for no reason. I told myself to stay calm, to keep moving, to trust that I'd find my way out. I didn't. On the third day, it rained. First, it was just a light drizzle. Then it turned into a steady pour. Everything got soaked. My jacket kept my upper body dry for a while, but my pants were heavy and wet, and my boots started to squish with each step. The forest floor turned to mud. I slipped and fell more than once. My pack got heavier. I stopped every few hours to wring out my socks and adjust my gear. The worst part was the cold. Crept in slowly under my clothes into my bones. My fingers got stiff. My legs started to cramp. I felt tired all the time. I barely ate. Just energy bars, some nuts, a bit of jerky. I tried to ration everything. By the fourth day, my water filter clogged. I had to start boiling water, but I was low on fuel. I tried to collect rainwater in a Ziploc bag. I didn't know if it was safe, but I had no choice. My lips were cracked. My stomach burned with hunger. My legs were covered in scrapes. I had 2 blisters on each heel. My ankles ached. My lower back throbbed. My knees felt swollen. I hadn't seen any sign of humans in 3 days. Then I found something. It was an old hunting blind, falling apart, nailed up between 2 trees. It looked abandoned for years, wooden boards darkened by weather, parts of it missing. But I climbed up just to get off the ground. Inside, I found 2 rusted cans of food, a broken knife, and an old lighter. One of the cans was beans. I opened it with a rock, scraped the top, and ate it cold. It was disgusting, but I didn't care. I kept the lighter. It worked. That gave me a little hope. But the next morning, I woke up shaking. I was weak. I had a fever. My legs barely worked. I tried to stand, and the pain shot up my left knee. I couldn't put weight on it. I had twisted it somehow while climbing down from the blind. I took painkillers from my first aid kit, but they barely helped. I had to walk with a branch as a crutch. Every step was slow, loud, and clumsy. I started yelling out every now and then, hoping someone would hear. Nothing, just birds. Then the footprints. They weren't mine. I found them near a patch of soft dirt, next to a small rock outcrop. They were fresh, heavy boot prints, deep, going in the opposite direction from where I'd just come. First, I was relieved. Someone was nearby. Maybe a hunter, maybe a ranger. I started following them. I yelled again. I made noise. I snapped branches on purpose, but no one answered. I followed the prints for over 2 hours. Then they stopped. Just ended. No sign of turning around. No sign of anyone. Just forest. I stood there a long time. Something didn't feel right. The prints were big, deep, heavier than mine. I got this sick feeling that maybe someone had been following me, not the other way around. I stopped yelling after that. I moved slower, quieter. I started glancing behind me every few minutes. That night, I didn't set up the tent. I just crawled under a fallen tree, wrapped myself in the sleeping bag, and stayed completely still. I didn't sleep, couldn't. I heard sounds all around me. Twigs snapping, something breathing close by, long dragging noises, then silence. I gripped the bear spray in one hand, the broken knife in the other. On the 6th day, I saw a plane. Just a speck way up in the sky, but it gave. I've always liked hiking alone. Not because I'm some wilderness expert or adrenaline junkie. I just like the quiet. I work a noisy job in a noisy city, and I live in a noisy apartment. So, when I can get away, I like to walk where I don't hear cars or phones or people arguing through the walls. Just trees, wind, water. That kind of peace. This time, I had a long weekend off, and I planned to use every second of it. I picked a new spot, a loop trail that wrapped around the edge of a forested mountain range. The whole loop was just under 30 miles, and I figured I'd spread it out over 3 days. Hike in, camp at 2 different spots, then finish the loop and head back to the car. I packed light but smart, enough food, water filtration gear, backup batteries, and the basics for cold nights. I even brought my bear spray, though I hadn't seen a bear on a hike in years. I parked the car around 8:30 on a Friday morning. The lot was small, just gravel and a few wooden posts. Only one other car was there, a beat-up Subaru with faded stickers on the bumper. I didn't think much of it. I signed in on the trailhead register, slung my pack over my shoulders, and started walking. The first day was calm. The trail weaved through thick woods, pine and spruce mostly, with patches of birch here and there. The path was well-worn, easy to follow. Climbed gently, nothing too steep. I passed a few creeks, all still flowing even though it hadn't rained in a while. I filled up on water, boiled it at lunch, and pushed on. The air smelled clean. Not that fake air freshener clean, but the real thing, dirt, bark, and cold mountain air. I barely saw a soul the whole day. By late afternoon, I made it to the first campsite. It was nothing special, just a flat clearing near a bend in a small river, with a couple of logs arranged into makeshift benches. I set up my tent, made a small fire just for warmth, cooked one of my dehydrated meals, and sat there until it got dark. I didn't even look at my phone. There was no signal anyway. That night, I slept fine. I heard the usual stuff: wind rustling leaves, branches creaking, the occasional splash of a fish jumping in the stream nearby. Around midnight, something large walked through the woods behind my tent. I sat up, heart thumping, but it didn't come closer. Just padded through the brush and vanished. Could have been a deer, could have been something else. Either way, it didn't bother me. The second day was when things started to feel off. I got an early start. The trail curved north, then west, climbing up onto higher ridges. The trees thinned out in places, giving me views down into long valleys and across to distant peaks. Somewhere around noon, I came to a fork. The map said to stay right to continue the loop, but the left fork looked like it cut through a ravine and rejoined the trail a few miles ahead. It would shave off an hour or 2 of hiking. The left path was narrower, more overgrown, but not closed off. I stood there for a while, looking down both paths. I checked my GPS, it showed both routes, but not in much detail. The ravine looked steeper but shorter. I figured, I've got daylight to burn, and my legs are already sore. A shortcut didn't seem like a bad idea, so I went left. Right away, the air felt different. It was cooler in the ravine, and the trees grew closer together. The sunlight barely reached the ground. The trail itself narrowed into more of a game path. Maybe people used it years ago, but it didn't look well-traveled now. Roots and stones stuck out, and I had to keep my eyes down just to avoid tripping. I kept moving, telling myself I was just saving time. But something gnawed at me. I didn't hear birds anymore, not like earlier. No rustling, no chirping, just the occasional snap of a twig or distant crack like a branch falling. The deeper I went, the steeper the ravine became. The trail dropped sharply in some parts. I had to slide down on my hands a few times just to stay balanced. Around 3 in the afternoon, I reached a stretch where the path disappeared entirely. It turned into a dry stream bed, full of loose rocks and half-rotten logs. The walls of the ravine rose sharply on both sides, maybe 30 or 40 feet high, too steep to climb without gear. I checked my GPS again. According to the screen, I was still on the shortcut, just another half-mile from where it would reconnect with the main loop. That half-mile took me 2 hours. The terrain was worse than it looked. The rocks shifted under my feet. Thorns snagged at my pants. I slipped at least 5 times, once bad enough to scrape my palm bloody. At one point, I had to wade through knee-deep mud where the old creek still held some water. I was covered in dirt and sweat, and the shadows were getting long. When I finally reached the spot where the shortcut was supposed to meet back up with the trail, there was nothing. Just more trees. No sign of any trail. No blaze marks, no worn dirt path, nothing. I walked in circles, checking the GPS again and again. Said I was right on the trail, but I wasn't. I tried walking east, hoping I'd hit the loop trail if I just kept going. But the ground sloped upward, too steep and full of loose rock. After 20 minutes, I stopped. I was tired, filthy, and starting to get a little scared. I decided to set up camp right there, just before nightfall. The ground was sloped and full of stones, but I cleared enough space to pitch the tent. I made a tiny fire from dead branches and dried moss. No cooking that night. I wasn't hungry anymore. I just sat there, trying to calm my breathing, listening to the forest. That night was different. I heard movement again, but closer this time. Something circling the edge of my camp. Not rushing or charging, just slow footsteps, crunching leaves, pausing every few seconds. I lay still in my sleeping bag, bear spray clutched in one hand. The sound kept going for maybe an hour, maybe more, then silence. The next morning, I packed up fast. I was running low on water and had to get back to the main trail. I chose to climb out of the ravine and try to get a better view from higher ground. Took everything I had to scramble up the slope, grabbing at roots and rocks, pulling myself upward inch by inch. By the time I reached the top, I was soaked in sweat, hands torn, knees bruised. Still no trail, just more woods. No cell service, no landmarks. I was completely turned around. I kept walking. I tried to go west, then north. I used the sun, even pulled out the compass on my watch. But every direction looked the same: thick trees, uneven ground, steep slopes. By noon, I'd used the last of my filtered water. The streams I found were either dry or too muddy to risk drinking without filtering, and my filter had clogged from the muck the day before. My lips were cracked. I could barely swallow. Still, I forced myself to keep moving. Then I saw something. Tarp. At first, I thought I was hallucinating, but it was real. An old, faded blue tarp stretched between 2 trees in a makeshift shelter. Beneath it, an overturned crate, a rusted camp stove, a couple of crushed beer cans. Nobody there. No backpack. No sign of food. I stood there a long time, looking at it. Whoever made this hadn't been here in months, maybe years. But for a second, I thought maybe I could wait there, maybe someone would come back. But I knew that was stupid. I took a few things. One of the cans, empty. A lighter that didn't spark. A plastic bottle with a cracked cap. No help. I moved on. By the end of the second full day, my legs felt like dead weight. Every step was hard. I stopped sweating, which scared me more than anything. I knew that meant dehydration was setting in. I found another creek near sunset. Cleaner water this time, flowing slow but clear. I dropped to my knees and drank, barely able to stop myself from gulping too fast. Then I collapsed and didn't move for nearly an hour. When I finally got up, I made a small fire and lay down beside it. I didn't bother with the tent. I was too tired. I slept badly, waking every hour from sharp pains in my hips and back. I dreamed of voices, but there was no one. On the third day, I gave up on finding the loop trail. I just walked in one direction, west, toward where I thought the parking lot was. I climbed over ridges, slid down dry slopes, pushed through thorn bushes that shredded my sleeves. Late in the afternoon, I smelled smoke, not from my own fire. Real smoke with smoke close by. I followed it, heart pounding, and after 15 minutes I saw it. A forest road. Dirt, tire tracks, and at the end of the turn, a yellow service truck. I nearly cried. I stumbled out onto the road just as the driver was getting in. He saw me, waved, and came running. I couldn't even explain everything. I just pointed behind me and said I was lost. He gave me water, sat me down, called it in. I was 3 miles off the loop trail. The ravine shortcut I took had been closed years ago after a rockslide made it impassable. My map was out of date. The trail didn't reconnect anymore. That's why I never found it again. They brought me back to my car that evening. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time. I had been hiking for years, not professionally or anything like that. Just something I liked doing when I wanted to clear my head. Whenever I got tired of work, tired of traffic, tired of my phone buzzing all the time, I would find a trail somewhere out of town and just walk. Sometimes it was a few hours, sometimes it was an overnight trip. But this time I decided to go out for 2 nights. I wanted to push myself a little, and I thought the solitude would do me good. I picked a trail I hadn't done before, somewhere deep in the northern hills of a large state forest. I'd read about it online and it seemed quiet, not too popular, which is what I wanted. It looped through hills and valleys, touched a few creeks, and ran close to some old fire roads that weren't maintained anymore. The loop was about 30 miles total. I figured I'd do 15 miles the first day, 10 the second, and finish with 5 on the last morning. I liked having a clear plan before heading out. I got there early in the morning. The parking lot was empty, and it was cold. The air felt sharp when I stepped out of the car. I locked everything up, threw on my pack, made sure my food was packed tight in my bear canister, and headed into the woods. The trail started off nice. It was wide, well-marked, and mostly dry, even though the rain had come through a few days before. Tall pine trees lined the first few miles. The forest floor was soft with needles, and the trail had that faint earthy smell I always loved. I didn't see anyone else. There weren't even any fresh footprints in the dirt. That felt good. I wanted to be alone. I walked at a steady pace for hours. Around noon, I sat on a rock and had lunch. Just a peanut butter sandwich and a protein bar. I drank half a liter of water and checked my map. I was making better time than I thought. That's when I first noticed the little dotted trail on the map. It was marked as Old Shortcut and cut across a ridge that would shave off about 3 miles. It didn't connect back to the loop until the far end, but it looked doable. I thought about it for a few minutes. The main trail bent wide through a valley, which was a longer route. The shortcut would save time and let me make camp earlier. I decided to take it. The first mistake was not checking the condition of the trail. The dotted line on the map didn't mention that it was no longer maintained. The moment I turned off the main trail, things started to change. The ground was softer and had more undergrowth. Fallen trees blocked parts of the path. Some places were overgrown with tall grass and thorny bushes. I had to push through with my arms, getting scratched here and there, but I kept going. I told myself it was still better than walking an extra 3 miles. I could already picture the fire I'd build at camp, the warm food I'd eat, and how I'd relax by the creek I planned to camp near. About a mile in, I stepped on something soft and almost twisted my ankle. It was a dead animal, some kind of deer. It was half-eaten, and flies were buzzing around it. Its back legs were gone, ribs exposed. The smell hit me hard. I pulled my shirt over my nose and walked faster. I figured a bear had gotten to it maybe a few days ago. I kept checking behind me just in case. I had bear spray, but still it felt off. The trail began to fade more and more as I moved forward. At one point, I wasn't even sure if I was on the trail anymore. I could see faint signs of flattened grass and occasional tree markings. Old paint, faded almost to nothing, but I had to stop every few minutes to check my compass. The trees felt closer now, almost like they were leaning in. I pushed on for another hour. That shortcut wasn't short. It became clear it was old, maybe unused for years. At some point, the forest started to look the same in every direction. I felt like I wasn't going forward anymore, just moving in circles. I looked at my compass again and realized I had veered slightly east. I adjusted course, but by then the sun was starting to dip. I hadn't expected the shortcut to slow me down this much. I told myself I'd make camp at the first decent spot I could find. But there was nothing flat. The land was uneven, covered in thick roots or thorny bushes. I had to keep going until I found a place where I wouldn't wake up with a rock in my back. I finally found a spot just off the trail. It wasn't perfect, tilted slightly, but it was the best I could get. I set up my small tent, pulled out my stove, and made some instant noodles. They tasted bland but warm. As the sky turned dark, I felt the temperature drop. I layered up and got inside the tent. That's when the sounds started. First, it was just branches snapping in the distance. That's normal. Animals move through the woods at night all the time. Then it was the sound of something stepping, slow, steady crunches on dry leaves. I held my breath. It didn't sound like a deer. Deer are quicker, lighter. This sounded heavier. I stayed still for a long time. The steps got closer, then stopped. Nothing for minutes. Then again, just a few steps. I looked at my bear spray and kept it in my sleeping bag, close to my hand. I didn't move much that night. I hardly slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined something just outside the tent, watching. I thought about yelling or making noise, but that felt worse, like it would draw attention. I decided to stay silent. Morning finally came and I stepped out. The ground outside the tent had been disturbed, just slightly. The leaves were moved around, like someone had walked a circle around my tent. But I saw no prints, nothing clear. Maybe it was wind, maybe a raccoon. That's what I told myself. I packed quickly. I skipped breakfast. I just wanted to get out of the shortcut and back to the main loop. I figured I had a few more miles left, but the trail kept shifting. At one point, I walked into a patch of forest where the trees were packed tight together. I didn't see a path anymore. I checked my compass and tried to keep moving west. My legs were getting tired. My pack felt heavier. My neck hurt from sleeping tense all night. Then it started raining. Not a light drizzle, real rain. Came down hard and fast. The forest turned muddy. The soft ground made walking harder. Water dripped from every leaf, soaked my clothes, filled my boots. I slipped twice, once hitting my knee on a rock. It hurt, but I kept moving. I saw something metal in the distance. I walked toward it. It was an old hunting stand, just a rusted metal frame with broken wooden steps. Probably hadn't been used in years. But next to it, I saw something worse. A blue tarp, half covered with leaves and branches. I thought maybe someone had camped there and left it. I walked over and pulled it up. Under it was a pile of bones. Real bones, not just animal. There were deer bones, sure, but also what looked like a boot, old and half buried. Inside it was a sock. Something about it felt wrong. The bones weren't clean. Some had bits of cloth stuck to them. There was an old jacket balled up near the tarp. It was torn, like it had been ripped apart. I backed away. I didn't know what to think. Maybe it was a hunter who had an accident. Maybe animals dragged things here. I didn't want to think worse than that. I didn't want to know. I just wanted to leave. I started walking fast, then running. The trail was gone, so I used the compass, heading west, hoping I'd hit the loop again. I tripped, slid down a slope, grabbed onto roots to stop myself. Mud got into my hands, under my nails. My knee throbbed from the earlier fall. My pack was soaked. Then I heard it again, those same footsteps. Not close, but there. Just faint, steady. Behind me, I didn't look back. I just kept moving. I didn't stop. Not for water, not for anything. Eventually, I saw a marker. A real one. Bright orange paint on a tree. That was from the main trail. I almost cried. I followed it, moving as fast as I could. Slipping, breathing heavy, legs shaking. I made it back to the loop late in the afternoon. I didn't camp that night. I hiked straight through the last 5 miles back to the parking lot. I got to my car after dark. The lot was still empty. My hands shook as I unlocked the door. I sat inside for 10 minutes before I started the engine. I never reported the bones. I thought about it for a long time afterward. I thought about the tarp, the boot, the jacket, but I couldn't bring myself to go back there. I didn't even want to look at maps anymore. I threw the one I used into the trash. That was the last time I hiked alone. I still go out sometimes, but only on marked trails and only with people I trust. I learned that shortcuts aren't always shortcuts. Some trails are forgotten for a reason. Some places out there aren't meant to be found again. And whatever circled my tent that night never made a sound in the daylight. But I felt it, and I still think about what would have happened if I had camped 10 feet to the left, closer to that tarp, closer to the pile of bones, closer to whatever it was that moved when I didn't. It was the end of September when I decided to take a solo hiking trip. I had been planning it for weeks, wanting to get out of the city and be somewhere quiet. I'd been stressed from work, tired of the crowds, and I thought that maybe a long solo hike through the woods would clear my head. I didn't pick a well-known place on purpose. I chose a trail about 6 hours away from home, somewhere I hadn't been before, and according to a few online forums, it didn't get much foot traffic. The trail was in the middle of a national forest, no major campgrounds nearby, just some backcountry spots where a person could set up a tent if they wanted to. That's what I liked about it. No kids running around, no RVs, no weekend warriors blasting music. Just trees, streams, rocks, animals, and quiet. I drove there in the early morning on a Friday, packed up with everything I needed: tent, sleeping bag, food, cooking gear, water purifier, map, compass, knife, flashlight, batteries, bear spray, first aid kit, everything. I didn't bring my phone charger on purpose. I wanted to disconnect for a few days. I only told one person where I was going, my cousin. I texted him before I left the last cell tower range, said I'd be back by Monday. When I pulled up to the trailhead, there was only one other vehicle in the dirt parking lot, an old white pickup truck with no plates on the front. It was dusty, looked like it had been there a while. At the time, I didn't think much of it. A lot of backcountry hikers leave their cars for days. I double-checked all my gear, put on my pack, locked the car, and started walking. The weather was good, about 65 degrees, overcast, light wind. The trail started wide, then narrowed after a few miles. Trees got denser, and the air smelled like wet pine. I didn't see a single person the entire day, just birds, a few squirrels, and some deer tracks in the mud. The deeper I went, the more peaceful it felt. I stopped for lunch near a small stream around noon, ate some trail mix and jerky, filled my bottle with filtered water, and kept going. I made it about 10 miles in before I decided to set up camp. I found a flat spot off the trail, maybe 200 feet into the trees. It was quiet there, no sign of anyone else. I cleared the ground, pitched my tent, and cooked some freeze-dried pasta over my small stove. I sat for a while just listening. No cars, no voices, no airplanes. Just wind in the branches and the occasional crack of a twig. It was perfect. That night, I crawled into my sleeping bag, zipped the tent shut, and drifted off to the sound of crickets. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up needing to pee. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. Everything was normal. Cold, dark, quiet. I did what I had to do and got back in the tent. But right before I fell asleep again, I thought I heard a sound. Not an animal, a footstep, just one. A faint crunch on the forest floor. I lay still, holding my breath. I waited, listened. Nothing, just silence. I told myself it was probably a branch falling, or maybe some animal stepping on leaves. I'd been on edge a bit, probably from being alone. It's normal for the mind to play tricks when you're out in the woods by yourself. I rolled over and tried to forget about it. The next morning, I packed up early and kept moving. I wanted to reach a lookout point that was about 6 more miles down the trail. It was supposed to have an amazing view of the valley below. I walked fast, pushing through the misty air, and by mid-morning, I was there. And it was incredible. You could see for miles. Thick green forest below, mountains in the distance, clouds hanging low like smoke. I sat for a while, ate a protein bar, and just stared out at the world. Then I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. A few feet behind me in the dirt were footprints. Boot prints. Not mine. These were deeper, wider, and the tread didn't match mine. They were fresh too. The edges were still sharp, not smoothed by wind or rain. I stood up and looked around. No one in sight, just trees and silence. I followed the prints for a few feet. They stopped right behind a boulder, like someone had stood there, just watching the overlook. Watching me, I froze for a while. I didn't know what to think. Maybe they were from yesterday or earlier this morning. Maybe someone came up before me, but I hadn't passed anyone on the trail, and the only other car in the lot was that old truck. I hadn't seen a single person in almost 2 full days. I tried to shake it off, told myself not to panic. Maybe someone just hiked out, turned around, and left. But the feeling stayed with me, that heavy, tight feeling in the chest, like I was being watched. I left the lookout and got back on the trail, moving quicker now. I kept checking over my shoulder. Every time I stopped to drink water or tie my boot, I listened, but there was nothing. Just the wind, trees creaking, birds chirping. Late afternoon, I reached a small clearing where I planned to camp. There was a fire ring there, probably from another hiker long ago. I looked for more footprints, but didn't see any. I set up my tent, boiled some water, ate in silence. The whole time I kept glancing at the tree line. My stomach never fully relaxed. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up, listening for sounds. Around 2 a.m., I swear I heard something again. It wasn't an animal. It was faint, but it sounded like someone walking slowly. Crunch, pause, crunch. I sat up, knife in my hand. I didn't unzip the tent. I just sat there listening, sweating. The sound stopped eventually. I stayed awake until dawn. By morning, I made a decision I was going to hike back out. I had enough food to last a few more days, but something didn't feel right. I packed everything quickly and got moving as soon as the sun was up. The trail back felt different. I moved fast, didn't stop much. Every little sound made me twitch. At one point, I saw movement in the trees far behind me. Just a flash, something dark moving between trunks. When I turned to look, it was gone. Could have been a deer. Could have been something else. Around midday, I reached a stream crossing where I had to step on some large rocks to get across. That's when I saw it. On one of the rocks was a boot print. Same tread pattern as before, deeper than mine, facing my direction. That meant someone had crossed after me. I didn't think anymore. I just moved, faster than before. My legs were burning, but I didn't care. I kept going. No more breaks. Just walked and walked, constantly looking back. And then I heard it. Behind me, maybe 100 feet back, someone stepped on a stick. It cracked loud in the quiet forest. Not an animal sound. Not random. A step. I didn't turn around. I started running. My pack bounced with every step, the straps digging into my shoulders. I didn't care. I ran for maybe a mile, lungs on fire, legs shaking. Eventually I slowed down, completely out of breath. I ducked behind a thick tree, dropped to one knee, and waited. Nothing moved. No sound. Just wind again. I stayed like that for almost 10 minutes, barely breathing. Then I stood up and started walking again. Slower now, trying to be quiet. I kept looking back. My heart wouldn't calm down. Late afternoon, I finally reached the edge of the trailhead. My car was there, but so was the white pickup, still parked in the same spot, still dusty, still no plates. I stared at it for a long time. Then I noticed something that made my whole body go cold. There were fresh boot prints in the dirt near the truck. The same tread pattern, leading toward the trail. None going back. Whoever made those prints was still out there. I unlocked my car with shaking hands, threw my pack into the back seat, and got inside. I locked the doors, started the engine, and backed out fast. As I drove down the dirt road, I kept glancing in the mirror. Nothing followed, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town, almost an hour away. I pulled into a gas station and just sat there for a while, breathing. I checked my phone. 10 missed texts from my cousin asking if I was okay. I called him, told him I was fine, just tired. I didn't tell him about the footsteps or the prints. I didn't know how to explain it. When I got home, I reported the white truck to the Forest Service, gave them the exact location, told them it had been parked there all weekend. They said they'd send someone to check it out. A week later, I called back to follow up. The guy on the phone told me the truck was gone when they got there. No sign of it. No sign of anyone. I've thought about that trip a lot since then. I still hike sometimes, but never alone anymore. And never off-grid. I always carry a satellite tracker now. I always let people know where I'm going. I don't take risks like that again. I don't know who was out there. Maybe someone living off the grid. Maybe a drifter. Maybe something worse. All I know is that I wasn't alone, and whoever it was, they didn't want to be seen. They followed me for miles. I don't usually go hiking alone, but that week, I really needed it. I had just gone through a few rough things, one of those phases where everything just feels off. I wasn't eating right, wasn't sleeping much, and work had me drained. I needed space. Not the kind of space where you sit in your room and turn your phone off, but actual distance from everything. I wanted to hear wind instead of cars. I wanted to hear water running over rocks instead of the buzz of a refrigerator or air conditioning. So I packed my gear, checked the forecast, and made a plan to drive 5 hours north into a remote stretch of forest that bordered a huge protected area. No cell service, no people, just woods, trails, and time. I left early in the morning, around 5:30 a.m., with a hot coffee in the cup holder and a light drizzle hitting the windshield. It rained for the first 2 hours of the drive, but it started to clear up once I hit the hills. I had done most of my prep the night before: water filter, freeze-dried food, sleeping bag, tent, flashlight, lighter, small knife, emergency whistle, rain gear, and an old paper map of the area. I also had a backup phone battery just in case, though I wasn't expecting reception once I passed the ranger station. By the time I pulled into the small gravel parking lot at the trailhead, it was about 10:15 a.m. There were only 2 other cars there, both parked a little crooked. The forest around the trailhead was thick and quiet. No birdsong, no wind, just heavy stillness, like the trees were holding their breath. I liked it. I filled out the little check-in slip at the board near the start of the trail and dropped it into the metal box. The sign said to log your name and expected return time. I wrote that I'd be back in 2 nights. I had planned a loop that would take me out about 15 miles before circling back. 2 full days and 1 night in the middle of the woods, then 1 more morning to hike back out. I tightened my pack straps, took 1 last sip of cold coffee, locked my car, and started walking. The trail started out easy, wide, well-marked, with only a light incline. Everything smelled damp. Ferns were heavy with water, and the ground had a soft give to it under my boots. I saw a few squirrels, and once a deer darted off through the trees ahead. There were parts of the forest where the canopy was so thick it felt like dusk even though it was mid-morning. I liked those parts the most. I've always found comfort in quiet places where everything feels tucked in and closed off. About 2 hours in, I reached a fork in the trail. The left path led up toward some rocky ridges, and the right dipped down into a valley. According to my map, both would get me where I needed to go, but the left one was longer and steeper. I took the valley trail. My legs weren't warmed up yet, and I figured I'd save the climb for the second day. It was when I got down into the lower part of the valley that I noticed the feeling of the forest change. It was subtle at first, just a weird silence, like everything had backed off. No more rustling in the leaves, no bugs flying around, no birds calling out, just my footsteps and my breathing. The air felt stiller, heavier, almost humid. I chalked it up to elevation or just forest density, but it still made my stomach feel tight. The trail narrowed as I got deeper, and it started to get muddy in places. At one point, I nearly lost a boot in a patch of thick muck. I had to stop, brace myself against a tree, and pull hard to get my foot out. The mud was cold and smelled sour, like something had rotted down in it. I wiped my boots on some nearby moss and kept going. Around 3 p.m., I reached a stream, cut across the trail, and there was no bridge, just a few flat rocks sticking out above the water. I crossed carefully and stopped on the other side to take a break. I sat down on a dry log, took my pack off, drank some water, and ate a protein bar. As I sat there, I noticed something strange. On the far bank of the stream, across from where I had just crossed, there were boot prints. Not mine, bigger than mine, maybe a size 12 or 13, deep in the mud and facing toward the trail I had just come from. That wasn't odd by itself. This was public land, after all. People hiked these trails all the time. But what made me feel off was that the prints looked fresh. The edges were crisp, and there was still water pooled in one of them. But I hadn't seen anyone all day, and I would have heard someone crossing that stream. The mud was loud when I stepped in it. It sucked and slurped. You couldn't walk through it quietly, and the other two cars at the trailhead had looked like they'd been there a while. Dusty, pine needles on the windshields. I stared at the prints for a while, then shrugged it off. Maybe someone had taken a shorter loop or come through from another trail that connected nearby. The forest was big, and I wasn't the only one out here. I should have turned around then. I kept hiking for another 2 hours. The trail rose and fell gently, cutting through thick patches of pine and open areas where old trees had fallen and let light in. Around 5:30 p.m., I found a flat area just off the trail where I could set up camp. There was a small clearing surrounded by boulders and dense trees. It felt hidden but not boxed in, and the ground was dry and soft with pine needles. I pitched my tent, filtered some water from a nearby stream, boiled it, and made a bag of chicken and rice. As I ate, I kept looking around. I couldn't shake that feeling I had earlier, that something was just off. I kept thinking about those boot prints. Why were they so fresh? Why hadn't I seen or heard whoever made them? As the light faded, the forest went dark fast. I got into my tent, zipped everything up, and tried to sleep, but I couldn't. I lay there for hours, eyes open, listening. Every little sound made my body go tense. Twigs cracking, leaves shifting, the wind pressing against the tent wall. I kept telling myself it was just the forest, just animals, just weather. But my brain wouldn't stop cycling through bad scenarios. What if someone was out there walking the trails at night? What if they saw my tent? At some point, I must have fallen asleep, because I woke up suddenly to a noise that snapped me awake. Something had knocked against the side of my tent. Not hard, just a light push, like someone had poked it with a finger. I held my breath. My heart was pounding. I lay perfectly still, straining to hear anything else. But it was dead silent. No wind, no movement, nothing. I slowly reached for the flashlight next to my sleeping bag. I didn't turn it on yet. I waited, listening. Minutes passed. Still nothing. Finally, I clicked it on and shined it around the inside of the tent. Everything was normal. Then I unzipped the flap and pointed the beam outside. The forest looked the same as it had before. Dark, still, and empty. I didn't sleep again after that. I lay there until the sky started to lighten and the birds finally started up again. I packed quickly and hit the trail earlier than planned. My legs were tired from barely resting, but I just wanted to get moving. I figured once I got out of that valley, I'd feel better, but I didn't. As I hiked, I kept checking behind me. Every 30 minutes or so, I'd stop, turn around, and stare down the trail. I never saw anything, but once, I thought I heard a branch snap back there, way off in the trees. Not close, just far enough that it could have been anything, but loud enough that I noticed it. The trail climbed steadily that day, and my legs burned from the uphill stretch. I kept my pace fast, too fast for comfort, but I just wanted distance between me and that part of the woods. Around noon, I reached a ridge where the trees thinned out and I could see for miles. I stopped there to catch my breath. That's when I noticed something far below, near the base of the hill I had just climbed. Something small and dark, just barely visible between the trees. It moved slightly, like a shape shifting its weight. Too big to be a deer, too steady to be a bear. I stood there for a long time, watching. The shape didn't move again. I kept hiking. I didn't stop for lunch. I chewed jerky while walking and drank water from my side pouch. By late afternoon, I was back near the main loop, getting close to where I'd reconnect with the trail that would take me back out the next day. I found another spot to camp, smaller, tighter, less exposed. This time I built a fire and kept it going into the night. I needed light. Even just a small ring of it made me feel better. I didn't hear anything that night. No knocks, no snapping twigs. But I didn't sleep much either. I just stared at the ceiling of my tent and waited. The next morning, I was up before the sun. I didn't eat, didn't even change clothes. I packed my gear in 20 minutes and hit the trail with the first gray light. I wanted to be out of the woods before noon. About an hour in, I noticed something strange again. Another boot print. Same size as the one from the stream. Same depth. Same direction, facing the way I had just come. It was on the edge of the trail, in a soft patch of dirt between roots. I stared at it for a long time. Then I looked behind me. Nothing. But I knew. I knew I wasn't imagining it. Someone was out there, following, watching, keeping back just far enough to stay hidden. I don't know why I decided to do that hike alone. I had done a few solo hikes before, but this one was different. I should have known that from the beginning. I guess I just wanted to test myself. Or maybe I was tired of the same daily routine. I thought being out in the wilderness, far away from my phone and people, would help clear my head. It had been a tough year, work stress, a breakup, the usual stuff people go through. So I thought, why not head into the woods for a few days? There was a trail I had read about online, way up north, not very popular. It wasn't listed on the official hiking apps, but a few backpackers on a forum talked about it. Some remote path that ran through forested hills and connected to an old fire lookout tower at the top of a ridge. They said it was quiet, peaceful, and untouched. Exactly what I needed. I printed a rough map from the forum, packed up supplies, filled my car with gas, and drove out there on a Friday morning. The first red flag was the dirt road to the trailhead. It was barely a road, more like a pair of ruts cut through a field of weeds and small rocks. I had to slow to a crawl just to avoid getting stuck or bottoming out. I remember checking the time and thinking how late I was starting. By the time I reached the clearing where the hike began, it was already 3:40 p.m. The air smelled like pine and soil, and for a moment I felt good. It was quiet. Not the kind of quiet you get in a room, but the kind where your ears adjust and suddenly you realize you can hear tiny bugs, the soft rustle of tree branches, the distant call of some bird you don't recognize. I double-checked my pack, tied my boots tighter, and locked my car. Then I stepped onto the trail. The path was overgrown and narrow, maybe wide enough for a single person. It snaked through thick trees, mostly pine, and dipped up and down over the hills. At first, it was manageable, though I had to keep swatting at spiderwebs that stretched across the trail. There were no markers or signs. I had to keep checking my printed map to match the bends in the trail with what I thought I was seeing in real life. I hiked for about 2.5 hours before deciding to stop for the night. I found a flat patch of ground a bit off trail and set up my small tent. The sun had already dipped below the trees. The temperature dropped fast. I boiled some noodles on my camp stove and ate them sitting cross-legged outside the tent. That night, I lay there listening to the sounds of the forest. Every crack of a branch or rustle in the leaves sent a jolt through me. I told myself it was probably just deer or raccoons. The next day, I woke up with stiff legs but decent energy. I packed everything up and pushed deeper along the trail. The terrain started getting steeper and the forest grew denser. The path was hard to follow at times. There were places where I had to guess which direction to go. I started to get this weird feeling in my stomach, like something was off. I shrugged it off as being alone in unfamiliar woods. Around midday, I came to a small stream. I refilled my water bottles using my filter, rested for a bit, then pushed on. The path started to climb after that. Steep, rocky hills that made my legs ache and my heart pound. I kept telling myself it would all be worth it once I reached that old fire lookout. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I know how that sounds. It wasn't like I saw anyone. I didn't. But every so often, I would stop walking and stand still, holding my breath. And I swear I could hear something in the trees, just out of sight. The snap of twigs, the soft crunch of leaves. But when I turned to look, there was nothing, just more trees and silence. It got worse later that day. I found a pile of rocks in the middle of the trail, not natural. They were stacked, 5 of them balanced on top of each other, too neatly to be random. At first, I thought it was some hiker's marker, but the trail didn't split or change direction there. It was just a pile in the middle of the path. I left it alone and walked around it, but I looked back at it a few times as I kept moving. It bothered me more than it should have. That night, I couldn't sleep. I set up camp near a thick patch of trees, far enough off trail to feel hidden, but I still didn't feel safe. I didn't light a fire. I ate jerky and nuts in silence and got into the tent as soon as the sky went dark. I kept thinking I heard something outside the tent, soft footsteps. Maybe? I held my breath and listened for what felt like hours. My flashlight was in my hand the whole time. I didn't sleep more than an hour or two on and off. The third day was worse. My map didn't match the trail anymore. I think I had gotten turned around somewhere, maybe when I crossed that stream. But the hills looked different, and the trail itself had faded. I kept going uphill, thinking I might find the lookout tower soon, but all I found were more trees and brush. I stopped around noon to eat something. That's when I noticed a cut on my leg, small but bleeding. I must have scratched it on a branch or rock. I cleaned it with some alcohol wipes and wrapped it, but it started to throb after a few hours. By mid-afternoon, I was limping. My knee ached with every step, and I started to feel dizzy. I was low on water again. I hadn't seen another stream all day. I remember leaning against a tree and realizing I hadn't seen any wildlife, not even birds, for hours. Just silence. I kept pushing forward, hoping to find something. An open view, a landmark, anything. Instead, I found another stack of rocks. This one was taller. 7 or 8 stones stacked neatly, right in the center of the trail again. I felt cold all of a sudden, even though I was sweating. I didn't know what to think. Someone had been there. Maybe they were still nearby. Maybe they were watching me. I moved faster after that. I didn't care about the pain or the limp. I just wanted to get out of there. But the trail didn't lead out. It got narrower, then broke apart completely. I ended up in thick woods with no clear direction. I turned in a slow circle, trying to match the trees with anything on my map, but nothing made sense. I pulled out my compass, but it spun slowly like something was messing with it. I tapped it a few times, held it flat. It just wouldn't settle. That's when the panic started. Not full-blown yet, but it crept in. I sat down to calm myself, drank the last of my water, and looked through my pack. I had a backup phone battery, but no signal. The phone just said searching. I stared at it for a long time, hoping it would change. Didn't. I walked until it got dark, not even trying to follow a trail anymore, just moving downhill, figuring that would eventually lead me to a road or a stream. I nearly fell twice. My leg was killing me. Every step felt like it might snap something inside. I set up my tent on uneven ground and sat in the dark, too tired to eat. That night was the worst yet. I heard movement around my tent again, closer this time. Slow steps, not animal-like. I couldn't move. I just sat there, clutching my knife in my hand, heart pounding so loud it was the only thing I could hear. I didn't sleep at all. When the sun finally came up, I packed everything as fast as I could and started moving again. I couldn't walk straight anymore. I was dragging my bad leg. The forest started to look the same in every direction. I stopped checking the compass. It was useless. Everything was useless. My throat felt dry. My lips were cracked. I kept imagining the sound of running water, but I never found any. Sometime that afternoon, I found a clearing, a wide, flat space with grass and scattered trees. In the center was a rusted metal barrel and what looked like a collapsed shed. I hobbled toward it, half laughing out of relief, thinking maybe there'd be something. Tools, supplies, even trash I could use. The shed was empty. The barrel had old ash in it. No roof, no walls, no sign of people. But the grass was flattened in places, like someone had been there recently. That scared me more than anything. I didn't stay long. That evening I heard it, an engine, a distant low hum. I nearly cried. I followed the sound, crashing through the trees with everything I had left. After half an hour, I broke through the trees and saw a dirt road. I dropped my pack and waved like crazy. A white truck came into view, then slowed down and stopped. It was a local forest worker, an older man. I must have looked half dead. He helped me into the truck, gave me water, and drove me to a ranger station. From there, I was taken to a clinic. I was dehydrated, had a bad infection in my leg, and needed a week to recover. They asked where I had been. I showed them the map I printed and told them about the trail. They said that trail hadn't been maintained in years. The fire lookout tower had collapsed a decade ago. No one went up there anymore. Too dangerous, too remote. I asked about the stacked rocks. They just looked at each other and said people sometimes leave markers, but it was odd how I saw more than one. They didn't press further. I didn't either. I've never gone hiking alone again. I still have the scar on my leg, and sometimes I dream about those nights in the woods. The silence, the feeling of being watched, the cold dread in my stomach. What scares me most isn't what I saw, it's what I didn't. I had been planning a solo hiking trip for weeks. I worked long hours in a small office, and the idea of getting away into nature, no buzzing phones, no computer screens, no people, sounded like the only thing that could fix how burned out I was starting to feel. I wasn't a beginner hiker, not exactly, but I wouldn't call myself experienced either. I had gone on a few-day hikes, some light overnighters, and I'd always stuck to marked trails. Nothing dangerous. This time, though, I wanted to push myself. Not too far, but far enough that I could really feel like I was out there, alone. I picked a remote trail in a national forest in the northern part of the state. I spent a few days checking maps and blogs, reading weather forecasts, and buying gear I didn't already have. The trail I chose wasn't popular, but it was known among some solo hikers who liked isolation. It had no campsites, no cell service, and barely any traffic. It was marked, though official, and I made sure I had everything. A GPS, a printed map, compass, plenty of water, a headlamp, extra food, a tent, a backup battery pack, a whistle, everything people say you should take. I parked my car at a gravel lot near the trailhead early one Saturday morning in late September. The air was cold and damp. Leaves had started to fall, and the forest smelled like wet dirt and rotting bark. It was quiet except for the soft crunch of leaves under my boots and the occasional crow in the distance. I signed my name into the trail ledger at the ranger box near the gate, noting my planned route and expected return. I zipped my jacket, adjusted the waist strap of my pack, and started walking. For the first few hours, everything went smooth. The trail was narrow but well marked with small wooden signs nailed to trees. The terrain was uneven, rocky, and steep in some parts, but I liked the way it challenged me. I saw no one. That was part of the appeal. I moved at a slow pace, stopped often to drink water, check my map, eat small snacks, and just breathe. I had planned to hike about 12 miles that day and set up camp near a small clearing I saw on the topographic map. The weather was cloudy, but there was no rain, and the wind was light. Around noon, the clouds started getting darker. I remember thinking I needed to keep moving faster in case the rain hit early. I kept looking at my GPS, confirming I was on the right trail, and I followed the signs exactly. I passed a shallow stream, climbed a steep ridge, then descended into a narrow, shaded valley where the trees grew close together. The ground felt spongy, and the smell of decay was stronger. That was when I saw the fork in the trail. There were no signs on the trees here, no arrows, nothing. One side went slightly uphill and looked well-trodden, with patches of exposed dirt and fewer leaves covering the ground. The other side curved sharply downhill into thicker woods. It looked more overgrown, like fewer people went that way. I checked the map again, and it didn't show a fork here. I opened my GPS. It was still tracking my route, but the signal had weakened. I stood there a minute, unsure. The uphill path looked like the right choice. It looked more used, and it was heading in the general direction I wanted. But something made me hesitate. I don't know why. I just had a feeling. I decided to go downhill instead, thinking maybe it was a shortcut or just an alternate path that would reconnect. I didn't want to go back the way I came, and the idea of climbing that steep hill again was something I didn't want to deal with. At first, the downhill path was okay. A little muddy, but not too bad. I figured it had rained recently. The trees grew tighter, and soon I felt like I was walking through a tunnel of branches. I kept moving, stepping carefully, looking for any kind of marker or clearing ahead. My GPS lost its signal completely about 20 minutes later, but I still wasn't too worried. I assumed it would come back when I got out from under the trees. Then I realized the trail was no longer a trail. It had just disappeared. It happened so gradually I didn't notice. The dirt path became covered in thick layers of leaves and roots. The ground sloped harder and I slipped a few times. Branches scratched at my jacket and face, and I had to start pushing through them with my arms. I stopped and turned around, thinking I could backtrack, but even that looked wrong. I couldn't see the fork anymore. Everything behind me looked the same. Trees, leaves, branches, moss. I tried to remember how long I'd been walking, how far off the trail I might have gone, but time started to feel weird. I hadn't looked at my watch in a while, and the sky above was totally covered with dark clouds now. There was no sun to help me tell direction. I sat down on a dry rock to get my bearings. I opened the map again and unfolded it completely, smoothing it over my lap. I knew I had to be somewhere between miles 7 and 8 of the trail, near a ridge that dropped into a stream. But there was nothing on the map that matched where I was. I didn't hear running water. I didn't see any ridges or valleys, just trees and shadows. I waited a while, thinking maybe I just needed to rest. I drank some water, ate a granola bar, checked the GPS again. Still no signal. I tried my phone. No bars. The air started to feel heavier. The wind had picked up slightly and was pushing leaves around in sudden, random bursts. It felt like the woods had gotten quieter, like even the birds and insects had stopped making noise. After sitting for maybe 20 minutes, I decided to keep going any direction just to find a clearing or a high point, something to help me figure out where I was. I marked the rock I sat on with a red strip of tape from my bag, just in case I circled back. I started walking uphill, pushing through trees, trying to keep a straight line. But the trees kept shifting in density. The ground kept rising and falling in uneven ways, and soon I had no idea if I was still heading in the same direction. I walked for over an hour, maybe more. I didn't find a clearing. I didn't find a trail. I found myself at the edge of a steep drop, maybe 50 or 60 feet down into a dry gully filled with jagged rocks and thorn bushes. I stood there, breathing hard, sweating even though the air had gotten cold. I could feel the panic rising, but I forced myself to stay calm. I told myself I just needed to retrace my steps. I looked for the red tape I'd used earlier, but I never found it. I turned and started back the way I thought I came, but nothing looked familiar. The panic came back harder. My legs started shaking. I stopped again to check my water and rations. I had enough for a day, maybe two if I rationed everything carefully. I still had cell service in mind as a backup plan. If I climbed a hill, I might get a bar or two. So that became the plan: find the highest spot possible and try to get a signal. As I kept climbing, the woods grew stranger. Not because of anything supernatural, but because of how unfamiliar they looked. I had never seen forest like this. Massive fallen trees blocked entire sections of the slope. Thick moss and wet leaves made the climb dangerous. I had to use my hands to pull myself up in some areas. I slipped more than once and scraped my palms on wet bark and sharp rocks. It started raining lightly around 3 or 4 in the afternoon. The sound of it hitting the leaves was soft at first, but soon it soaked everything. My jacket helped a little, but my pants and boots got drenched. I kept climbing until I reached a small rise that overlooked more trees and hills, but still no sign of a trail or a cell signal. The light was starting to fade. I realized I had to find a place to camp soon. I set up the tent in the least wet area I could find, which wasn't saying much. I tried to clear away leaves and rocks, laid down the tarp, pitched the tent and crawled inside. I changed into dry clothes, then just sat there listening to the rain. I didn't sleep much that night. Every sound outside the tent made my heart jump. Wind moving branches, small animals dripping water. They all sounded too close. I held the flashlight in my hand, keeping it pointed at the zipper just in case. By morning, the rain had stopped, but everything was soaked and cold. I ate a little, packed my things, and kept walking. I don't know how many miles I covered that day, but it felt like 10 or more. I never saw another person. I never found a trail. I only saw endless trees, mud, and hills. I started yelling occasionally, not for help, just to hear a human voice. It felt like the forest was pressing in closer with each step. That second night was worse. My tent was damp. My food was running low. My water filter had started clogging from all the mud in the stream I finally found. I kept imagining what would happen if I didn't make it out. I thought about the trail ledger at the ranger station, how I'd written my name, my route, my return date. That was something, at least. On the third day, I got lucky. I found a rusted metal sign nailed into a tree. It was bent and barely readable, but I could make out a faint arrow and the letters of an old trail name. I followed it. It led to a narrow path covered in dead branches and overgrowth, but I didn't care. I followed it for miles. Around dusk, I saw something in the distance that almost didn't look real. A wooden footbridge over a shallow stream. I limped across it and kept walking. By nightfall, I saw a gravel road. I collapsed near the edge and waited. It took hours, but a park ranger eventually drove by in a pickup.